Welcome everyone to today's February 28th, 2023 Basics of Bioptic Driving webinar. My name is Katie Frederick and I am a digital content manager with the APH Connect Center with Vision Aware, which is our program that focuses on providing resources and content for adults and professionals. And today we are here to talk about the topic of bioptic driving. And as you're filing in, if you would like to, feel free to put in the chat if you are a professional or consumer, student, just a little bit about who you are and where you're coming from today. And we are providing ACV REP credit for today's webinar. So I will go ahead and pause the recording so that we can get those in. Let me, 1 second. All right, let's see here. Is it 1 second? Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to our Bioptic Driving webinar. And today we have two presenters who I know are going to provide us with excellent information on this topic that many are interested in. And so I would like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Chuck Huss, who received his Master's of Arts degree in Orientation and Mobility from Western Michigan University in 1976. He has worked as an Academy Certified Orientation and Mobility Specialist, COMS, in the public and private sector of West Virginia for the past 46 years, serving clients and students, all the way from students to people in the geriatrics side of things. He is a nationally known for his work and experience in formalized bioptic training and assessment. Chuck has also served on one of the driver rehabilitation specialists within the West Virginia pilot low vision driving study from 1985 to 1988, and its continuum of related services from 1989 to 2008, and as the full-time West Virginia Bioptic Driving Program from 2009 to 2022. And Chuck has also served on a multidisciplinary bioptic driving work study committee from 2016 to 2021, which resulted in the passage of the Pennsylvania House Bill 2296 that took place in November of 2020. And he has since assisted with the in-service staff training of over 60 professionals now involved in the provision of formalized bioptic driving services throughout Pennsylvania. And that started in September of 2021. Prior to his retirement, which occurred in 2020-22, Chuck was a full-time employer for the past 39 years at the West Virginia Division of Rehabilitation Services, WVDRS. And he will be again talking to us this afternoon on the topic of bioptic driving and starting with the basics and prerequisites. So, and following Chuck's presentation, we are also joined by Steve Kelly, who is a certified vision rehabilitation therapist and works at Hadley. And Steve is going to share some of his experiences with bioptic driving as well. But first, Mr. Chuck Huss, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you kindly, Katie. And I'll go ahead and open up my PowerPoint here. All right. Clear from your end of the line? Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. In the event, and I'm hoping there will be interest illustrated by a number of the attendees after the presentation, but in the event that you would like additional information or you would like a copy of my PowerPoint, including presenter notes, which I've formulated for this presentation, please take the time to write down my email address. I will also share that orally with you right now. My email address is as follows: Chuck, lowercase, CHUCK, underscore, followed by my last name, Huss, that's HUSS, at hotmail.com. The title of my presentation is Bioptic Driving, starting with the basics and prerequisites. What I'm hoping to accomplish over the next 45 minutes or so are as follows. I've been asked to provide an overview of what bioptics entail, along with an update of the current status of, quote, bioptic driving. From there, we'll lead into a brief overview of the basic types and features of prescription bioptic lens systems. We will also give you some idea of who makes a suitable candidate for driving with low vision, along with the accommodation using bioptics, and some of the common misconceptions related to this functional task of bioptic driving. For those of you that are relatively new to driving with low vision, we'll also share with you the importance of being pre-driver ready, especially those young novice candidates who never expected the opportunity and thus may have not paid a whole lot of attention to the dynamics of driving in years past. And then as we get near the end of my presentation, we'll be sure to share with you how do you go about locating an in-car service provider of bioptic driving services. And then for those who would like additional information, I've provided you a page of names, titles, and email addresses of authors in literature where you can obtain more information about this very interesting topic. Now then, oftentimes I'm asked, whether it's on the phone by parents, spouses, or novices, Chuck, exactly what is a prescription bioptic telescopic lens system? And a lot of times, the reason why I like to cover this right from the very beginning is sometimes people get the misnomer that these devices are only used as far as looking through the telescope only for driving. And that's a total misnomer. In fact, the telescopic portion of the device is only used about 2 to 5% of the total driving time. But more commonly, the set of glasses with the telescopes in them is referred to as a bioptic. And in actuality, it's a combination of a regular pair of glasses along with a miniature telescopic lens unit located usually in the upper part, though it can be located in other parts of the carrier lens, but usually in the upper, in front of one eye or both eyes. They are prescription in nature, so you can't get them through a mail order catalog. They must be prescribed by an optometrist and or ophthalmologist who practices clinical low vision. Oftentimes, I'm also asked, Chuck, what actually is driving with bioptics or, quote, bioptic driving? I've found the functional definition coined up by Dr. Lynn Noon, who recently retired. She was a former diplomat in low vision rehabilitation out in the Mesa, Arizona area. She defines bioptic driving as follows. She indicates that it's the operation of a motor vehicle by a person who uses one of these dual optical lens systems to accommodate for, quote, known central vision loss. And that's one thing that I want to share with all of the attendees tonight. The individuals that are most likely to benefit from these devices for visual assistance in the driving task are those that have full or relatively full peripheral fields of view, yet their central 2 to 5 degrees of vision may have experienced a mild to moderate level of central vision loss in that central cone. So keep that in mind. Now, as far as the status of bioptic driving did not pop up overnight. It's taken years. When we first started our research in West Virginia, just to give you an idea, and that was some 40 years ago, we took a look at what was available in the literature. And at that time, we found that there were only 13 states, according to a 1983 California DMV study that surveyed all of the states across our nation with the 51 licensing jurisdictions. Only 13 at that point allowed or recognized the use of prescription bioptic lens systems for driving. And this map of the United States with those states that would allow it, highlighted in yellow, provide you with an idea of those states. And they exist from West Coast to East Coast. But now the situation's a little bit different. The only states that specifically do not permit the use of scopes for driving include the following: Utah, Iowa, and with reservations, Connecticut. And I'll share with you why I mentioned the word reservations. Yet those three states in particular do allow driving with mild to moderate levels of central vision loss without the use of the scope. Utah at the 2100 level, Iowa at the 20/199 level, and Connecticut around the 2199 to 2200 level. Be apprised, though, that the state of Connecticut just passed a law this past year, which will allow in the future individuals, whether they're novices or experienced drivers who experience vision loss with age, will allow them to use scopes for driving. At the present time, however, they're taking a close look at what they want their vision standards to be, their assessment, and their testing standards. So all states, excluding those three for right now, allow the use of scopes. And this is illustrated by all these dark colored blue states on this map. Now, I mentioned to you that for states to accept the use of bioptics, it took a period of time. In fact, it took over 40 years. But this slide here provides you a sampling of when a particular state accepted the use of scopes, either legislatively or in promulgated rules, etc. You notice that all the states are highlighted in white with the exception of 3. And the ones that are highlighted in sort of an aqua blue color include Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia. There's a particular relationship between those 3 states that I would like to quickly share with you. Back in 1991, when Ohio put together their first bioptic driving law, they used the results of the West Virginia pilot low vision driving study that took place between 1985 and 1988. Their first law passed in 1991. 10 years later, after the unexpected passing of 2 of the most outstanding opponents to the use of scopes passed away within the same year. One resided in Kentucky, one resided in New Jersey. Within 12 months of their passing, Kentucky passed their first bioptic driving law, and they based theirs on the Ohio law. Not quite a decade later, in the state of West Virginia, even though they had been researching and also actually implemented a program before a passage of an actual law, they finally passed their own law. That came in 2008 with the implementation of the West Virginia full-time bioptic driving program in 2009. So this slide provides you a sampling of when certain states implemented bioptic driving legislation. Not only did we see a change over time with the allowance of bioptics for driving in the United States, But we also seen a broadening of vision standards or a more liberal outlook for low vision individuals to apply for driver licensure. But at one time, it wasn't that way. For instance, dating back clear to 1937, when proposed by the American Medical Association's Committee on Vision Standards for Drivers of Motor Vehicles, the proposed vision standards for a restricted driver's license at that time were as follows. Best corrected visual acuity, that is, out of standard glasses or contacts, of 20/65 in the better functioning eye or better. A field of view out of that same better functioning eye of 125 degrees horizontally or more, and in an absence of diplopia. So, 80 some years ago, vision standards for a restricted driver's license as proposed by this committee were fairly conservative in nature. But that's not the way things are now. So this next slide provides you an overview of the wide variability from an acuity standpoint of restricted driving privileges per licensing jurisdiction. And all 51 are licensed or indicated here on this slide. You notice, though, that I have some pictured in green and some in a mauve color. What these indicate, the ones in bright green indicate that the applicants going after the Bioptic driver's license are able to use the telescopic portion of the device to meet those vision requirements from an acuity standpoint. So, for example, in the state of Nebraska, even though they require 20/40, even for restricted privileges, they're permitted to use the telescopic portion of the system versus the carrier portion of their Bioptic lens system to meet that standard. So in reality, they're really allowing low vision driving at a lower level. Or for example, the state of New Jersey requires 20/50, but in reality, New Jersey really licensed people all the way up to 2200. It's just that they like the way that it's listed. They like the more conservative nature when it's done on paper. In the mauve color, you notice that we have up to, there's 12 or so states that license at the 2200 level. That's a legal blindness level. So we can see the wide variability going from 20/40 through 2200. Now, take the information from this slide and let's apply it back to a map to give you an idea what has happened here in the United States. Well, it appears that static visual acuity is becoming less of a concern from a standpoint of applying for driver's licenses. For example, at one time, when you had pass-fail standards in every state or every licensing jurisdiction across the United States, it was 20/40 or better. But now, as this map is showing you, there are at least 12 states in the mauve pink color which allow 2200 driving from West Coast, with the primary emphasis of those states over in the eastern side of the United States. Likewise, there's an additional 10 states, all the way from Arizona, all the way up, going up through Vermont, that allow Bioptic driving with actually, believe it or not, no carrier lens limit. However, this may sound very, very liberal and hard to comprehend, but there's other stipulations, for instance, that may require that a particular state not allow anything greater than a 4X, or it may say that you have to get down to a certain level of improved acuity with your telescope. So even though they say there's no carrier lens limit, and I like the way they do that because it keeps them out of court cases by allowing anyone to apply, but it allows an individual also to demonstrate their competency behind the wheel.
Hey, Chuck, this is Pris. Somebody wants to know, can a person who got their license in a state where he could be 2100 drive in a state in which the drive into a state which has a limit of 20/40 if the student has 2100 vision?
They can do so. And I do have a article. In fact, let me just stop my presentation for a second here and I'll pull it out real quick. There was an article which appeared in the Journal of Visual Impairment and Blindness back in October 2004. It was written by a Mary Marta and Dr. Dwayne Gearshot, who went to school at Western Michigan with me back in 1976. The title of the article is called Equal Protection, the ADA and Driving with Low Vision and Legal Analysis. And what it indicates is, in answer to your question, if a person in one state who's very liberal is allowed to drive into and out of another state. So I'm going to read for you the one paragraph on page 3 of that article to provide you a very appropriate answer to your question. It is as follows. It is important to note that once a driver has been granted a license in one state, other states must recognize that license. This principle of states' recognition of other states' acts is guaranteed in the U.S. Constitution, which requires that full faith and credit be given in each state to public acts and proceedings. This full faith and credit clause of the Constitution allows for the somewhat arbitrary outcome that allows drivers who are licensed, for example, in California or Virginia, who obtain a license with a visual acuity of 2200 through their conventional eyeglasses, to drive in a state such as Maryland or Minnesota, where such residents of these states may not obtain licenses if their visual acuity is worse than 2100 through conventional lenses. So I hope that answers your question. Now, I would also like to add this. The only time, if you're licensed in one state and if you want to drive into other states, whether it's for recreational purposes, basic survival, or let's say work purposes, the only time that you might be restricted from doing otherwise, if the state where you are currently residing in, whether that particular licensing authority restricts your driving to a certain mile radius, to a certain time of day, etc. So that may put a damper on, let's say, overnight driving or driving after dark, driving after a certain mile radius, etc. Okay, does that answer your question?
One more question. It
There's-
says,
yep,
is
yep.
the law written in the Federal Code of Regs? If so, where can we find it?
I would have to do some research. So the person that has that question, if you can send me your email address, I'll see what I can find if it's in the federal regs. Okay, but I think that there is a quote in here, and let's see if I can provide you that quote.
Yeah, they're just clarifying because the article that you read stated it's constitutional. So just wondering
Yeah,
about that. So
yeah, it's in the U.S. Constitution, Article 4, Section 1.
okay.
Okay. Good question. Okay. Now to add some validity, because the things that I showed with you, I've been accruing over a lifetime in this field of over 40 or so years. But to add some validity to what I've already shared with you, I also did a follow-up survey just 2 years ago with all 51 licensing jurisdictions. Some of these licensing jurisdictions participated in staff and service training at our facility who, like West Virginia, wanted to get into low vision driving. And this survey was mailed out in 2019, August 2019, and it went all the way up through April of 2020. I received 46 completed surveys back from 33 driver rehab specialists, 13 eye care specialists, and these were representative of 32 of the 51 licensing jurisdictions, or 63% of the states. And I will share with you a couple of the results which we have. Here are the states that responded to my survey. There were 32 of them. And this is a sampling of one of the findings. Almost a 10-to-1 ratio of states allowing bioptic driving at the 20/280 best corrected visual acuity level, and that's through the carrier lens, versus states requiring 20/70 or better. So if you take this comment and apply it to the graph, all of those states from 20/80 all the way up through 2200 and beyond constitute almost a 10-to-1 ratio of those states to the left, which are 20/70 or better. In other words, even though it was proposed, if you recall from one of my earlier slides, that people for restricted driver's license be 20/65 or better, since then, people have realized that static acuity is much less important to the driving task than other visual characteristics, such as, quote, glare recovery, contrast sensitivity, binocular visual field loss. Those have more applicability to crash avoidance, driving record, etc., than static acuity. Likewise, another survey finding that I will share with you quickly is a 5-to-1 ratio of states requiring minimal horizontal field of view of 120 degrees or less versus states requiring a minimum horizontal field of view of 130 degrees or greater for bioptic driving purposes. So if we take that statement and apply it again to a simple graph, if you'll take a look at the three sets of states from 130 degrees through 150 degrees, that's 5 states. But if you count up all those states from 120 degrees all the way to the left where it's no minimum, you'll find that it's a 5-to-1 ratio of states that require less field of view versus greater field of view as originally proposed clear back in 1937. Now, I will be the first to say binocular field loss of significant loss is a significant detriment to safe, confident, and effective driving. And I will share that with you by being in the car with my students for some 40 years now, okay? So I'm a strong proponent that you have to have ample field, and that's why you see the state of West Virginia located in that 120 degrees in the better functioning eye. Now,
Chuck, this is Katie. Sorry, before you go on,
okay.
Someone in chat is asking again for that JBIV reference that you provided with the article about the driving. It was in 2004.
Yeah, it was October 2004. The name of the article was Equal Protection, the ADA and Driving with Low Vision, a legal analysis. Authors, Mary Marta and Dwayne Gearshot. Gearshot spelled Geruschat.
We'll try to find a link for that and put it in chat. Someone was asking for that, so I'll see if I can.
That was October 2004, volume 98, number 10.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's move on now to the basic types and features of prescription bioptic lens systems. There's 2 basic types: Galilean or fixed focus systems with illustrations as you see on this slide to the left, and Keplerian or variable focus systems, the systems to the right. Galilean system versus Keplerian systems have the following characteristics. Galilean systems, again, are fixed focus, which means there's no focusing knob. In other words, it's going to focus at one focal length and beyond. So when we use them for driving, and there's a number of fixed focus systems used for driving, for example, various designs for vision systems. There's a few Accutech systems that are Galilean in nature. They are fixed focus at a 20 feet or further. They call it infinity. Whereas Keplerian systems, which are used for tasks in addition to driving, for instance, at the intermediate or near range, they have a focusing knob or focusing wheel, etc., or focusing barrel. Galilean systems, in contrast again, are usually, but not always, smaller in size, where Keplerian systems are usually larger, heavier in weight, and longer. Galilean systems are usually have a smaller field of view in comparison to Keplerian systems, which usually have a larger field of view. And again, there's a little variability whether you have a wide angle system or a regular size system. The brightness of the image is usually better in Galilean systems, and that's due to the limited number of lens surfaces that when light enters that system and exit, it only goes through a maximum of 4 lens surfaces. Whereas in Keplerian system, it can be somewhere like 8 or 10 lens surface systems. Keplerian systems have a limit on the amount of magnification, which is usually 4x, whereas Keplerian systems, you can have systems made up to 14x. For those of you that would like to pursue obtaining additional information about the various types of systems available through whether it's Designs for Vision, Occutech, or a company called Conforma, which manufactures and develops the Beta lens system, the miniature lens system, I provided you contact persons along with telephone numbers and that contact person's email. So even if you type in on the internet simply the name of the company, you'll get to their websites as well.
Chuck, we have another question here in
Okay.
the chat about if people that may have a visual processing delay, is there any criteria or accommodations that may make driving safer for those individuals?
Good question. This is one of the reasons why I'm a strong proponent of actually formalized training. And I like that to include that in both passenger and car and behind the wheel instruction. This is where you find that if there is a delay in processing visual information, irregardless of age, whether it's age related or whether it's just a matter of an individual not being able to process things as quickly as need be during the driving test, you're going to find that out. And usually you find it out within the first 2 weeks of training. This is one of the reasons why most programs that have formalized programs also have a period of adaptation and evaluation, where they come in for, and our evaluation is down to a half a day in length, but we do take persons out for an extensive in-car passenger in car, as well as a brief behind the wheel evaluation to determine what level of not only visual functioning, but processing of information takes place. If we feel that they're not appropriate to continue at that point, we will share that in the follow-up that's provided out of car at the end of the evaluation. Sometimes in a novice student, it may be going back to do additional things on foot. Whereas with the adult, we may recommend additional evaluation, whether that's through the quote useful field of view, as well as other things that will take a closer look at whether it's visual processing or whatever it may be. In the years past, we also took a look at visual perceptual testing from various different types of things that occupational therapists could evaluate our potential candidates on. We also took a look at psychological processing using the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory and the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale Revive. So we took a look not only at physical skills, but mental skills, as well as the physical skills needed in driving. Hope that answers your question. Okay. Now, from a standpoint, we mentioned to you on the one map the number of states that allow driving all the way down to 2,200. Let's take who is usually a suitable candidate for driving with these prescription lens systems. First of all, we strongly recommend that the person who's using these devices have a stable and preferably long-standing eye condition. In other words, they may have been born with the eye condition, or after the eye condition became diagnosed, that it's not progressive in nature. Be aware, oftentimes states indicate in their laws they cannot discriminate anyone who meets the visual requirements for driving when they apply for such services. So you got to be real careful. And this is why mandatory visual retesting every year is so important. Another characteristic would be that the best corrected visual acuity in the carrier lens falls somewhere between 2070 and 2200 inclusive, and that's in the better functioning eye. Likewise, in that better functioning eye, a field of view of at least 120 degrees horizontally and 80 degrees vertically. We use those measurements in the West Virginia study. We think both a horizontal component and a vertical component are extremely important. Likewise, we feel that an enhanced level of acuity, whether some states will say 2040, or I suggest at this point 2060 or better through the scope. I'll give you a good example. In the recent law passed in the state of Pennsylvania, if you're going to only drive during daylight, you have to show improved acuity down to 2050 or less through the telescope. And the reason that Dr. Freeman wanted to have that way was because seniors who use these devices will benefit better from systems that are lower powered in scope, along with a wider field of view. And I agree 100% with that. Whereas those individuals who may be afforded the opportunity to drive at night after a year of good, safe driving, no violations, no at-fault accidents, etc., you have to be able to get down to a more significant level of improved acuity, say to 2040 or better. Another characteristic, I'm a strong proponent. Not everybody agrees with me, but I'm a strong proponent that you have to be aware of some awareness of color to differentiate color change when you approach a traffic light, whether those lights are vertically arranged or horizontally arranged. You have to be able to tell the differences in color on lane markings, road signs, the presence when a brake light comes on, turn signals, emergency vehicles behind you when they're flashing. And probably last and of no less importance, participation and completion of a formalized program of Bioptic driver training now is extremely important. Now there's approximately 28 programs across those 28 states, across the United States, that now require some type of training. The limits vary from one state to the other before you apply for driver's licenses.
Chuck, we have a couple questions here.
Okay.
One about for individuals who may have achromatopsia that are wearing special contact lenses.
Yes.
And if they can distinguish shades, is that sufficient?
Yes. Yes. Now, again, we've had the opportunity of working with more than 2 or 3 people with achromatopsia or other types of visual impairments that have visual color dysfunction. And this is where even during the initial evaluation, you get an idea, usually during the interview process, if there is a problem with color vision, because we come right out and ask them that. And then you take them out in the car as a controlled passenger in car, front right seat, and you find out how close they have to get to define which light is on, or even from stationary positions, and then find out if corrective lenses, for instance, any type of filters will aid, along with simply wearing a cap to increase contrast sensitivity, etc. So through colored contacts, through filters, through hats, anything you can attach to the visor to increase contrast of the roadway or of devices that you need to see color is going to need to be found out. If there is no semblance of color, then a lot of times those people will get to the point, even during the evaluation or early on in training, that they'll find that they may not be able to effectively, confidently, and safely operate a motor vehicle.
All right, and we have someone here that's asking if you could share that vendor resource slide real quick again, please.
The vendor for the colored contacts?
No, I think the slide you had with all the different vendor resources for the,
Oh, okay,
yes.
right there. All right. So again, the three vendors are Designs for Vision, Occutech, and Conforma. Jody Klager is the contact person for Designs for Vision. Dawn Jarvis is for Occutech, and Terry Mackley is for Conforma. Once again, for those who have an expressed interest of finding out more information from my presentation, if you'll simply email me, I will provide you a copy of my PowerPoint, including a copy of the presenter notes per se.
And we'll also put this up on our aphconnectcenter.org/webinars page. So
Excellent. Okay.
Yep.
Any other questions?
not at this time.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to misconceptions. Webster defines a misconception as an inaccurate or incorrect interpretation of something or misjudgment of what someone can or cannot do or the activity that they're engaged in. So I'm going to provide you a sampling of a couple of misconceptions related to bioptic driving. The first that I would like to share with you is the following statement. There is no known benefit nor reason to require that a person with a mild to moderate level of central vision loss to use or be required to use a bioptic lens system during the driving task. There are those that feel that this is a true statement. But in reality, what this system provides is as follows. It allows the person who's been trained in using this device correctly, both the carrier part of the system as well as the miniature telescopic unit, to increase what we call a margin of safety. That is the time in seconds, which is usually no more than 1 to 2 seconds, or that linear distance equivalent, that when you engage the use of telescope will increase their ability to not only detect from a further distance and sometimes identify, but then mentally predict and make a decision whether a change in speed or lane position is needed, simply by moving their foot from the accelerator to the brake or reducing acceleration or modifying their position on the roadway using the steering wheel as they approach what we call a critical object or condition. Here are some examples of what we're talking about. You're on a straight stretch of roadway. It's a secondary highway, and you approach a flagger, and he's got a stop sign facing you. And the reason for that is one of the lanes is closed ahead. Another example would be this one, where the road ahead is completely closed from both directions. The reason was, as we found out later, there was an accident just around the blind curve ahead where a pedestrian was hit by a semi. So they're asking all individuals, whether you're in the left lane or the right lane, to go left at that particular intersection. Or how about this situation? Imagine approaching this situation from a distance. You're on a straight stretch of roadway. Okay, you have ample sight distance. You go down to that telescope and you find out there's something different about that SUV. It's up and over its top, and you have all these emergency vehicles present at the intersection. It's an accident scene. Or this situation, which you're going to see daily in driving. Let's suppose you're first in line and you have to be able to perceive the color of that traffic light. Or further down, as you go through a commercial area, you notice that there's a speed change, which oftentimes exists between small cities as you go from a rural area to a commercial area, etc. However, and keep this in mind, like their normally sighted counterparts, in other words, individuals with, quote, what we call normal vision, those who use bioptic lenses are also taught to use what we call functional visual acuity measures. and that is employing what we call their carrier lens vision, the large rigger glasses, and what's oftentimes referred to as Gerald Fonda's approach magnification principles. Approach magnification is where you simply drive at lower speeds and have more time to react. So let me share with you an example of those. And here again, the part of this, the person's visual field that's going to be used with carrier lens vision is that off to the side of the white area. The white area is where they have the mild to moderate level of central vision loss, but that blue-gray area is the area which is used in paracentral and peripheral carrier lens vision. So these are the three types of functional visual acuity measures. One is called awareness acuity, and that's where you see something ahead, but you really can't identify what it is. You can't even really give it a name, but you know there's a gross difference between the object and its background. Or as you get closer, it's beginning to look possibly like a vehicle, and I think it's red in color. And as you get a little bit closer, now I know for sure, it's sure acuity, it is a red Ford Mustang. So let's take a look at the driving scene. Again, we're on that 2-lane secondary highway. You're approaching a utility scene, and we've just passed the person with the flagger, and he's mentioning with his hand, slow down, slow down, slow down. So here's an instance, even though you have a straight stretch of roadway where you may or may elect to use telescopic vision or carrier lens vision along with approach magnification. You notice something white in your lane down the road, you expect that it's probably the back end of a car, and there's something sort of orange shaped off to the right, and that's sort of like shaped like the end of a construction area, and there's something in front of the car that's crossing the road. You just can't make it out. It's in your lane, so you're slowing your vehicle down. This is what we call awareness acuity. Remember, even with awareness acuity, you can begin to make decisive decisions as a driver to reduce your speed and modify your lane position if needed. Again, we're getting a little bit closer. Now we notice that the white car disappeared over the horizon, over the hill that's present here. But now there's something over on the right side of the road. It's kind of white in nature. We still can't tell what it is, okay? And if you follow the cones down, there's something that appears to be a little bit yellow and orange. We still can't tell quite what it is. So we're going to call it awareness acuity again. Now we're getting closer. As we look down the left, we see that is a traffic guard. He's continuing to say, slow down, slow down, slow down. And we see something on the right. At this point, it looks like it could be a person in an ATV, okay? Maybe a 3-wheeler or a 4-wheeler. But when we get closer, what we find out, it's a person in an electric wheelchair. The point to be made here, we can take these slides back and notice now we can begin to make preliminary driving decisions at a further distance, even without the telescope, but just the realization that we can tell something from the foreground versus the background. And that's awareness acuity, identification acuity, sure acuity. Okay, so by the time we pass the wheelchair user, we may be a little bit closer to the orange cones on the left.
Chuck, we have a question asking if you could repeat the example of the awareness acuity.
Yes, awareness acuity is where something is ahead, but you can't really tell what it is. But you can tell that there's a gross difference between the foreground and the background. So when we go to the photo, you notice all the way down your lane that white blob in the road, okay? For anyone who's an experienced road user, driver, bicyclist, motorcyclist, cyclist, etc., they know that there's something in the road, and more than likely it's some type of vehicle. This particular stretch of roadway has these very low sloping type or low angle hills, okay? So your sight distance is restricted. Remember this in driving. Anytime your sight distance is restricted, whether it's due to a curve, whether it's due to a hill, or whether it's due to a dip, you do not engage the use of the telescope. The telescope will only be used as a spotting device, a vertical spotting device of usually 1 to 2 seconds per fixation. And a fixation is from the time that you go from the unmagnified carrier into the telescope, see what you want to see, and come back out. That's a complete fixation. So you're only into it and out of it for usually no more than 2 seconds. But as a trained user, usually can accomplish that within a count of 1001, which is 1 second. Does that answer their question? Okay. All right, let's go on to another one. And we've already answered this question. And the misconception here was, can states prohibit legally licensed Bioptic drivers to travel across state boundaries for basic survival purposes, employment, and leisure? And we mentioned, truth be told, it is allowed, provided there's no restrictions placed on the Bioptic driver's license by their respective licensing authority, which could potentially prevent crossing state lines, such as distance or area restrictions, time of day, type of roadway, etc. And there I share with you where that can be found. Now, let's move on to pre-driver readiness. Before you enter a formalized program of instruction, you want to have a particular level of experience and safety as a pedestrian. So we define pre-driver readiness as that knowledge which you accrue over time and the travel skills which you accrue needed to transition safely, confidently, and effectively from being a pedestrian walking on 2 feet to an active passenger in car. And by that, we're talking usually where you're in the front right seat to the actual motor vehicle operator. There's 2 types of pre-driver readiness skills. One, which we'll be emphasizing today, it's referred to as basic pedestrian travel skills, which are the ones conducted on foot, and those which normally are included in a formalized program of instruction, Bioptic driver training, which are called advanced, active, passenger, and car type of skills. It doesn't need to start in middle school, as we'll be sharing with you in the next slide or still. Parents and teachers can actually start this at age 3. In other words, they can even start helping their child or helping their student to enhance their use of their vision in a distance mode. And this is through the age-appropriate use of distance low vision aids. A document which was recently updated through the collaboration with Dr. Henry Green and others, including yours truly, has been put together. It's called Preparing Your Visually Impaired Child for Their Future. And it gets into how to teach children to use their distance vision using, first of all, starting with binocular scopes, then advancing to bioptic scopes, etc. It's only about a 12 to 15 page pamphlet. It is available. Again, if you contact me, I can send you free copies. I've also shared this with Katie, along with one of the next documents, which I'll be sharing with you. Keep this in mind. For the young novice student who never expected nor had the opportunity to drive, our objective will be, before they start training, is to increase the chances of qualifying for entrance to training. And that is with pre-driver readiness training on foot, starting on or about middle school. It should be conducted under the auspices or the direction of a certified orientation and mobility specialist, or COMS as we're referred to as. Again, starting no later than middle school, up through usually about the sophomore in high school, because that's Freshman sophomore is usually when kids, if their state allows them to apply for a permit at age 15 now. The exposure of travel outside will include residential through small metropolitan areas. Remember, we want to make you a safe driver by making you first a safe pedestrian. The emphasis of this instruction outside will start off around the same block of land, starting with a simple straight line route, L, then U-shaped, and then all the way around the block. You'd be surprised how many kids have never traveled around a four-sided block of land. From there, then you can involve them in more complex, multi-block, multi-directional routes, both road planned as well as self-planned, including their route reversals or the use of alternate routes. Include, can they analyze and cross both stop sign, as well as traffic light controlled intersections? And when you're at the intersections, do they understand what the transverse markings are? For instance, the stop lines on a two-way street versus a one-way street, the longitudinal pavement markings, whether they're yellow in color and white in color, and what do they mean? What do they mean when they become solidified versus dashed? Regulatory versus general warning signs. What do they mean as far as the environment? And then integrate concepts of compass directions, concepts of directionality, laterality, position, block distance, street continuity, street marker. Include exposure to large print maps and global positioning systems. And the person that I would really like to recognize, and I've included on my PowerPoint both his name and his email address with his permission, is a Mr. Craig Phillips from the state of Kansas. His email address is cleep, L-E-E-P, 1700, the number, at att.net. He is the expert, especially with handheld GPS systems. Also include exposure to both handheld, which would be monocular scopes, as well as handboard systems as they become a little bit older and more mature. Include ancillary distance optical and non-optical low vision aids, meaning sunwear or filters, brim hats or visors. Include in this pre-driver readiness training exposure to the use of a city bus or taxi. Remember, at some point in your life, even though you get your driver's license, you may have to rely either on others or public transportation to get to and from work. By the end of this pre-driver readiness training, and these are extremely important, but you need not write them down, and I'll share with you why. You need to have them achieve these four tasks. They have to be able to take in, have to be able to remember, and have to be able to follow route instructions, whether you're walking or whether you're a passenger in car or whether you're a driver in months to come. They have to be able to travel and reverse a route. And while traveling that route, they have to be able to detect, identify, and react in time to critical objects or conditions along that route. And then lastly, like we mentioned before, they have to be able to confidently, effectively, and safely cross both stop sign as well as traffic light controlled intersections. Those are the four main areas that we look for when we screen a person before we accept them into our formalized program, that they have to show us without a shadow of a doubt that they can pursue, either as a pedestrian or as a passenger in car. And all of that information is contained in this booklet, which I developed at the request of the Texas School for the Blind, clear back in 2012. We've used this booklet, which is available in standard print and large print, at our annual TSBVI in the driver's seat introduction to low vision driving with Texas teens and their parents for the past 10 years. Again, you can either contact TSBVI or myself. Do not use my old work address as shown on the slide here, but the Hotmail address, and I will send you both standard size print as well as large print copies of this booklet. But they contain all of the basic as well as advanced pre-driver readiness skills that you want to include in a either pre-driver readiness program or part of the advanced program as far as formalized Bioptic driver training.
Chuck, we have a question here that I think is excellent. Talking about, you covered that the importance of O&M for students who may qualify for Bioptic driving. But the question is, are there any additional trainings that O&M specialists should seek out in order to best teach advanced pre-driving skills, especially with the use of Bioptic lenses while a passenger in the car?
Okay, good question. First of all, you need to have legal authority. And in the state of Pennsylvania, TVIs, COMs, CLVTs, along with driver educators and driver rehab specialists are all allowed to teach the advanced passenger and car skills. And again, how you teach those are contained in the booklet. There is some training that you can ask to participate in that was taped by the PennDOT, Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, before they implemented House Bill 2296 in the state of Pennsylvania. But the skills, those are some of the skills that are contained in that booklet. In fact, again, if you contact me by way of email, I can share with you some skills that are precursors that are learned on foot that are then reinforced in car with some documents that I've put together, not only for Texas, but for those that participate in our in-service training sessions in West Virginia. Unfortunately, you're already aware, I've retired as of January 2022. So I'm not involved in the in-services being conducted in West Virginia. I do have some contacts that are still employed in the Bioptic driving program that may be able to provide those. I personally am not involved in those in services anymore. We trained 184 professionals from 27 states. So some of the information that I've accrued over the years, I can share with O&M specialists, CLVTs that become involved in it. But the thing I want you to check out before you start doing that is, do you have the legal authority to teach even passenger and car skills where the person's in a position in a right front seat by law? In the state of Pennsylvania, you're permitted to do that. In the state of West Virginia, I was permitted to do that, but only after a period of cross-training with my mentor, Bill Ramsey. So first, check it out by law to see if you're permitted to do it, and then go for there. If you're not permitted by law, you can always get the law changed. And I see that coming in a number of states. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Now, we're getting near the end of my presentation. I don't want to go too much longer because I know that Steve wants to get on here. Two last things. How do you locate a trained in-car service provider? And I provide you this slide. And again, if you get a copy of my PowerPoint, you'll know how to get your trainer per state. There will be approximately 10 or 12 states that will not have ADAD trained instructors, but they may have their own trained instructors. So the only ones that I will be able to provide you is if they're members of ADAD, which stands for the Association of Driver Rehabilitation Specialists. But you've got a list of 33 states, 153 people who are now willing to work with low vision individuals. And this is those ADAD members across the United States. And we'll skip that one. My last slide here. If you want more information about bioptic driving from various different perspectives, whether it's research, in-service training, you name it. From the clinical low vision standpoint, all of these authors that I've listed here and all of the emails are updated email addresses. Feel free to contact those individuals for information that they've either written and published. Oftentimes, they'll be more than willing to share with you a complimentary copy of what they've published. And with that, I will pass it over to Steve.
Chuck, we have a couple of questions. Do you want to
Okay.
take those now or hold those until after Steve presents?
Why don't we hold that until after Steve, okay?
All right.
It's all yours, Steve.
Okay, wonderful. Chuck, it was instrumental in what happened in Maine probably about 7 years ago when we changed our laws in the state. And I'm trying to remember, Chuck, when I sent you the first email, it was kind of like a desperate plea for help. It was probably about what 22 years ago or something like that, somewhere in that neighborhood.
And I
Anyhow,
think I think at that time, one of the things I emphasized was, what is it actually that you want to have changed? Okay?
Yeah, exactly.
And we went from there.
In my experience, I have been a Bioptic driver until recently for about 20 years. And it was kind of it was a bumpy road in the sense of legislation more than anything else. And let me just start out by asking you all a question that I learned or heard about in a low vision support group, because when I first lost my driver's license, and I lost it because in Maine, my vision had gotten worse than 20/70, I believe, in the better eye. And that was back about 22, 23 years ago or so. I felt like I was a pretty competent driver. And in fact, after the driver's license was revoked, I went to DMV and I said, I'm ready to take a driving test anytime. Put somebody in the car with me and let's go for a ride. And I feel like I'm capable, but that's not the way things work. So I just assumed that I would get support from low vision and blindness communities. And one of the first things I heard from someone who was a white cane user just kind of looked at me and said, what do you mean you don't see well and you want to drive? And I found that was kind of the same sense that I was getting from doctors, anybody that had to do with Department of Motor Vehicles. So it was a wonderful oasis to find Chuck and people who are interested in bioptics. And let me ask you a second question. Who are the most dangerous drivers? And I'll answer that. According to the CDC, the most dangerous drivers are young men between the ages of 16 and 19, and they are 3 times more likely to be involved in a fatal car crash than anyone between the ages of 20 and 80. Once you get over the age of 80, of course, that starts to increase. But I asked that question because nowhere does it say that the most dangerous drivers are low vision drivers. Nowhere does it say that the most dangerous drivers are bioptic drivers. And we all know if there was any additional danger to that population, the insurance companies would have raised our rates. I didn't pay any additional a fee or anything like that for being a bioptic driver. So the reality for people who are interested in bioptic driving, and even for the people who are concerned about bioptic drivers, is there's nothing out there to indicate that bioptic or drivers using a bioptic are any more or less dangerous than anyone else, particularly in that age demographic. And that was actually something that was kind of difficult for me to overcome, was the whole notion that, as a low vision driver, even though I felt safe, but there was so much pushback, both from the state and other folks about driving with low vision, that you kind of find yourself in a situation where you're feeling a little defensive about the whole thing. So in the process of my experience, the practical experience that I discovered living in southern Maine was that in my state at 2070, you lost your license. 20 miles away in New Hampshire, if you had 2200 vision or better in your carrier lens, which is legally blind, but you could put a bioptic on, which, by the way, fell under the category of corrective lenses within that state, and you could see 20/40 or better using the bioptic, you were good to go to drive. No training was necessary and no restriction, which practically for me meant that somebody 20 miles away could get their driver's license in the state of New Hampshire and drive to my state to get the job that I could no longer do because I couldn't drive to it. I had no transportation, and the public transportation infrastructure in southern Maine is not great. It's a pretty rural area. And this was one of the things that kind of confronted me and, kind of got me motivated in finding out a little bit more information, and also ultimately trying to change the law. In the process, we created a piece of legislation, I believe started in 2013. And that legislation, it was my hope to model after something that was similar in West Virginia or even Massachusetts, in which case the person needed to achieve a certain acuity through the bioptic, 20/40 or better, and was also required to have training. Now in West Virginia, Chuck, if I remember correctly, you have quite a few hours of training that are required before you get that license.
That
20/40 or more.
Yeah, actually, for a novice driver, it's 90.
Yeah.
It's 30 of classroom, 30 passenger in car, 30 behind the wheel. But our training program is a concurrent program, which means we can get it accomplished in 6 weeks. We get
Sure.
2 hours daily of each, okay? 5 days a week for 6 consecutive weeks, okay? If a novice driver has to stay a little bit longer, we include them. If an experienced driver passes a waiver test for the classroom instruction, they can waive out of the 30 hours of classroom. But there's nothing that denies them access to that. And oftentimes they'll say, I'm here, I'm going to take it. And the greater majority of even our experienced candidates, which now amounts anywhere from 30 to 40% of our candidates, take all 90 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
One of the things that I discovered, and I should say, I probably had a total of 3 to 4 hours of training over those 20 years with my Bioptic device, which was unfortunate because some of it was in the doctor's office when it first got fitted, and some of it was actually on the road with another comms in New Hampshire who does Bioptic training. And I kind of was a passenger as he drove, and we just kind of went through the thing. But I have to say that the adjustment process to wearing a bioptic is an adjustment process. And it's unfortunate the way the law was finally passed in the state of Maine. And again, there was a lot of pushback from the eye doctors, which I found surprising, but I know, Chuck, you're not going to be surprised by that. And there's a lot of research that helps you understand why there's so much pushback. But the way they ended up modifying the law was they changed the acuity level from 20/60, 20/70 to 2100 without any kind of a restriction. And they also clarified that you could use a bioptic to drive. You have to see 20/60 or better through the bioptic lens, apparently, in order to use it for driving. So it has been modified somewhat slightly, but there's nothing in there about training. And the reality in our state is very few people are aware that uh, bioptics are an option for driving. Oftentimes they simply get to that point and they find it a little difficult to drive, and their eye doctor encourages them to stop driving. And that's really unfortunate, because I think that there are a lot of folks who could continue to drive safely, like myself. I continued to drive for 23 years. In order to work around the system, after 2 or 3 years, I actually had to change my physical address for 6 years and move to New Hampshire to get a driver's license for 6 years. And then the law was finally changed in Maine, and then I was able to get another Maine driver's license again. But I think for people who are considering or looking at Bioptics, just the reality of, because it's such a state by state law, each state is different. What I realized, and this is true even today, in the states of New Hampshire and Vermont and California, for that matter, drivers can have 2200 vision or better and use a bioptic if they can achieve 20/40 through the bioptic. And that means that all of those people could drive in a city like Los Angeles, Boston, New York City. But if you were in rural Kennebunk, Maine, where I live, you would be denied a driver's license with that acuity. So there remains quite a bit of unbalance. And I think that other people who perhaps are on the webinar are going to find the same thing in their state. You may find that it's different in a neighboring state, where that person in the neighboring state might be able to get a driver's license and drive using the bioptic. Whereas in your state, even though they permit bioptics, the laws are such that it's difficult or different and you're unable to. So it is a bit of a challenge to kind of go through those different states and figure out what's available. I would just encourage anybody to look up the literature. And I know that you've got a state by state, and in the past I've used biopticdrivingusa.com. And if you think that that's an appropriate place, that's one of the places that I've often gone. That gives you an idea of what is available in your state. And then I would really encourage anyone to look into some behind the wheel training, because what I found was interesting, and I also find it was difficult to understand this until I actually put on a pair of bioptics. The idea behind the bioptic is you're wearing the glasses and you're looking through the carrier lens as you described. And on mine, I had a Keplerian, so it was kind of sideways on the top. I simply dipped my head down ever so slightly to look through the telescope. When I was looking down the road, I wanted to see, is there a pedestrian on the road? What is that I'm just observing? I wanted a little more clarity on it. And it was just a fraction of a second. You never drive through using the telescope, but I found myself, as I drove, I would be dipping my head down occasionally just to look, to get a little more clarity, to kind of take a broad view of the road down the distance. And it did take a little bit of practice. But after doing it for 20 some odd years, I became pretty comfortable. And I feel sure that just about anybody who undertakes this and does it seriously and gets a little bit of training is going to do just fine with it. And I think probably is a good idea just to leave it open for some questions here. We've got a few minutes left. I just wanted to share my experience, and I appreciate the opportunity to do that.
Thank you so much, Steve. And we now have a few questions I want to get to in chat as we wrap up. We have about 10 minutes left in our time together already. And we are going to put together another webinar on this topic. I put that question out and many of you have responded with enthusiasm on that. So we will be putting that together. So stay tuned to your email and other APH communication channels for more information about that. We had some questions come in asking about if vocational rehabilitation could help a student who is in 11th grade, if Voc Rehab could help with any financial instruction for bioptic driving.
I believe I can answer that. Yes, they will, and it varies from state to state. Let me share with you what we have in the state of West Virginia. In the state of West Virginia, you can get a legal tender permit at the early age of 15. However, a lot of times, vocational rehab counselors don't like to open up cases for something that's going to cost a good bit of money until they're at least 18 years of age or a high school graduate. We have licensed a fair number of individuals between ages 15 and 17. We have some rather unique concerns in West Virginia at the present time, but in answer to your question, yes, Voc Rehab does pay for it in our state. In fact, they're age non-discriminatory, so to speak. Okay, we cannot deny even a 80 or 90-year-old from our program with third-party funding through Voc Rehab if they're willing to go to work, even part-time. And we had one 89-year-old lady that did that. She became an art instructor to get into our program. Of course, we also offer a self-pay system at a very, very low rate. When I was working there for years, a person paid no more than $40 an hour, which is almost unheard of from a private driver rehab standpoint. Usually that falls somewhere between $100, $175 per hour for in-car instruction. But one of our past directors said, if we're going to open this up to all age populations for both people who want to work as well as people who are retired, you have to make it where it is financially feasible for them. So we're going to place it at a very low rate. We did that in West Virginia. Recently, I've been apprised that the state of Pennsylvania will at least, and I put it with limitations, will at least cover the in-car behind the wheel training for people across Pennsylvania. And we trained some 60 professional staff from all over Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania will have one of the unique features of any state in the United States, the fact that they have 3 large multidisciplinary programs with also private entrepreneurs that will provide the same type of in-car service in the community as well. So they'll have outpatient programs as well as community-bound programs. So each state is a little bit different, and a lot of it depends upon, do you want to go to work? If you want to go to work or return to work, Voc Rehab oftentimes will pay for quite a bit of the training. In West Virginia, it pays for the device, it pays for your room and your housing, or your room and board, along with all of the services. So we've got it pretty nice in West Virginia, but not in all states. Only about, I would say, less than 50% of the states currently fund bioptic driving. And again, I can provide you information as to which states do that. I recently did a presentation at the Eye in the Auto, where it was in reference to the survey that I found out from states across the nation. Do they fund or not fund bioptic driving? And they gave me a yes or a no. So for those of you, this was one thing that I asked of Katie, did she have any idea of where attendees were going to be coming in from, what their background, what state they are? If any of you are interested in further communicating with me, I would love to receive an email from all of you saying who you are, what your title is, and what state you're from. And if you're interested in bioptic driving, please let me know. Though I'm retired, my wife kids me, Chuck, you will never retire. So I love this topic. I love helping people, and I will be more than willing to assist in getting you the correct information or the correct contacts to people within your licensing jurisdiction.
Chuck,
Thank you so
may I
much,
just
Chuck.
jump in on
Yeah.
this real quick?
Yes, and then we have a question for you, Steve. So
Okay.
jump in, and then I'll ask the question for you.
I don't know where things stand in Maine in terms of funding, but I can tell you from a personal perspective, the Accutech that I used cost about $800 when I first bought it. But the loss of my driver's license cost way more than that because I was unable to work. And I'm just thinking, what research is out there that just compares the cost of providing VR services to someone who might be able to continue working and driving to work using an $800 device versus losing their driver's license, because I think that in a lot of places the cost is far greater for them not to be able to drive to and from work and the opportunities that provides.
I agree with you 100%.
So you answered part of this question, Steve. It asked if you're still driving. So it sounds like that is not the case. But the other part is, how would one locate an OD or ophthalmologist who agrees to work with Bioptics in the New England area?
Well, no, I'm not. I've chosen not to continue driving, and in the New England area, I think actually Chuck would probably be a better resource for that. I do know that in New Hampshire there is one person that I'm aware of that is fitting Bioptics, and I believe Kittery Eye in Kittery, Maine, still is taking patients for Bioptics, but I'm not aware of anybody else in Maine, which is most unfortunate.
Yeah, I do
All
have some
right.
contact persons, but Kittery is the primary practice.
Yeah.
We have a couple of comments here, just real quick. I know we have to go, so this is the last question that we'll take, and we're not going to get to all the questions. But again, we will have another webinar on this topic. So some questions about the negativity about bioptic driving, that it's unsafe, and have, people not having a chance to prove themselves, and have others experience this, and also some negativity around bioptic driving. So maybe Steve or Chuck, any of your thoughts on that in this last 30 seconds here?
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that it's a real reality. And that was one of the reasons that I brought up those statistics. And I think it was something that I read in Dr. Owsley's, she's written several articles over the years. And I think it was something that she pointed out in one of her articles, is there is nothing in the literature about a bioptic or even low vision drivers being any more dangerous on the road than anyone else in their particular demographic. I think one of the things that may happen, and this is why it's so important, I think, to have an assessment as we age. In addition to our vision, there are other things, our response time, our motor capabilities, all of those things combined, our hearing. So, at some point you have a combination of things that I think are going to affect your ability to drive safely. And I totally empathize with anybody who's experiencing that negativity. And I just wanted to, I don't think I shared, people can reach me by email, lowvisiontech@gmail.com, and it's spelled the same way it sounds, lowvisiontech@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from anybody and share war stories, if you will, but go ahead and give it a try. I think and advocate for yourself would be my recommendation. And I'm sure, Chuck, that's your recommendation as well. You've done it for me over the years. So
right. Something that I will add, Steve, during the first 8 years of the implementation of our full-time program, which started in 2009, from 2009 to 2017, 77% of our graduates and those were novice as well as experienced drivers, drove both accident and moving violation free.
Sure.
Okay. This is, some people have gotten the notion that because in years past, a lot of 16 through 19-year-olds, the reason why I personally believe that some of it's due to immaturity that they're involved in accidents and violations, but the small extent of behind the wheel training is usually less than 10 hours. Okay. And I think this is the thing. If we train more instructors, I would love to see someday that we could have low vision driving programs implemented into the public schools that have driver educators there. But they're currently not trained or experienced to handle those. And these individuals are time intensive. Okay. You can manufacture a driver's license. My mentor used to say, you can teach a monkey how to drive and pass it, the license test, because it's been so easy. But to make a safe, competent, and effective driver, you have to give them experiences in a wide variety of settings. And you do that over time. Whether you do that every day for so many days a week, so many weeks, or so many months, it will work. The more concentrated it is, the more the benefit the individual will receive. And you will see that in accrued driving records. Okay. I'm a strong proponent of it.
Thank you, Chuck. On that note, we need to wrap up. I'm going to stop the recording and give our closing code for those collecting ACV RAP credit. No, let's see.